Thank you for inviting me to speak to your group. It's always a pleasure. I always enjoy this. I always find that I learn as much as the people listening to what I have to say. My preference is for a discussion and a conversation as opposed to me talking. And in that light today, when George asked me to present, I emailed him back and I said, you know, it's going to be at 5 o'clock at the end of a long week and a hot Friday afternoon. So I don't know how I got this time slot, but I drew the short straw, I guess, and I think that it'd be far more effective and more interesting for all of us, particularly given the heat that's out there today, that if I gave a short discussion of about 10 minutes, and then you asked any question that you wanted, whether it's about value investing, whether it's about stock selection, whether it's about my career. Anything goes, is my view with questions. I find that I enjoy it more. I find that I'm far more effective in that format as opposed to making a formal PowerPoint presentation. And I find that most people get more out of it. If you do ever want to have a couple hours before bedtime and then need some time falling asleep, there is our presentation, or my presentation, under the value investing website. I gave a presentation there at Ivy a couple of years ago, so that is there, and the presentation essentially that you would have gotten on a Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning is on that website. So if you're interested in a little more detail or a little more structured presentation, please go to that website. And for your group, and because I have such appreciation for what George does, if you look at that presentation and you have any questions, please feel free to email me and I'll try to get back to you in a timely fashion. So having said that, let me just tell you a little bit about myself, how I got started in the business, and why I think I'm suited to value investing to start. I've been in this business since 1987, but prior to that, I worked for 2 years at the Bank of Montreal after I graduated from an undergraduate business degree. And I've got to tell you that it was probably the best training that someone coming out of school that either had a plan or fell into this business could ever have. When I started at the Bank of Montreal, there was a progressive American banker running the bank named Bill Mulholland, and his view was that banks should no longer analyze their credits as as if they were businesses that were about to be liquidated. I think time has proven him right that I think he felt that banks should analyze their businesses as going concerns so that they could grow and earn fees off of growing off a business that was growing, and in the end also avoid them, the headaches and the losses that come with the liquidation. So we started this group called the CMO group or the CBO group, and it was commercial banking officers. And in fact, we were financial analysts for the bank. And I, coming out of school, was just extraordinarily thrilled to get this opportunity. It was, first of all, a 3-month classroom training experience for everybody. And that 3-month classroom training experience was really an intensive 3-month training in accounting. And from that, I essentially learned, and then on-the-job practical experience, I learned 2 things. One is accounting. I learned accounting basically like it was the back of my hand, because at the time, we had to change accrual accounting statements into cash statements. So you can imagine the complexity of doing that. And there was only one way to do it, and that was to actually do it and grind it out and learn from your mistakes. So especially for someone like me coming out of school, they set it up as a bit of a competitive environment, and basically scared the bejesus out of me. If you don't pass this course, we're going to fire you. Basically, was kind of the message in the program, which turned out not to be true. But for a 23-year-old with some student debts and first job coming out of school, I was telling you, I was really motivated. Not only because of the fear, but because I found something that I really enjoyed to do. So That first job was, as I say, turned out to be, unbeknownst to me, a great grounding in what I was to do later in my career. And the essence, as I said, was one was the financial accounting, and two, the financial modeling. And after spending 2 years there, analyzing several different companies, several different industries, I went to Western, which is now called Ivy, to get an MBA. When I was at Ivy, I didn't really focus on finance. I took a general curriculum, and I always enjoyed business analysis. And I felt that when you analyze a business, finance was just one component of it. Perhaps in some ways, maybe the least important, as strange as that might sound to some of you. What I enjoyed about Western, and where I think there was a fit for me in the program, was that Western did the case study, as many of you may know, and that it was a program that forced you and encouraged you to take a look at the entire business from every different functional aspect and look at it from a strategic and an overall business point of view. I've been, one of the things that I think helped me become a good analyst, or helps me analyze companies, is that focus on the business as opposed to just the numbers in and of themselves, and whether it statistically meets the criteria for investments. So after those 2 years, I graduated in '87, and I got a job at OMERS. And OMERS, for those of you who don't know, is the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement System. And at the time, it was the largest pension fund in Canada and one of the largest in the world. And I got lucky. I got lucky to get a job. In Canada, jobs in the investment business, as many of George's students will attest, they're tough to come by. And I could only just say that I was blessed to get an opportunity with a large organization like that. Interesting. When I took that job, I was the second lowest paying job in the class. I turned down other higher paying jobs at the time, two and 2.5 times my salary to take that job. And one of the things that I tried to impart on my children and other students that come and talk to me is, don't worry about the money at the start. If you're passionate about what you do, and enjoy what you do, you'll make it all up and more as you progress through your career. At OMERS, I started, and this, to me, I still remember this date, May 4th, 1987, which many of you, if you look back at the charts, if you're not old enough to have that to been in the markets or in business at that time, it's right before the peak of the 1987 market crash. The market crash in '87 occurred in October, and I started on May 4th. And I started in the small cap sector, and the small cap fund at the time was the largest small cap fund in the country. And it had just been started, and so the manager responsible for that fund had to put in a certain amount of money every quarter into that fund, whether she wanted to or not, whether she could find enough opportunities or not. It had to be $5 million because this fund was growing at that pace. And if you can envision an environment where valuations are stretched, where speculation is rampant, where expectations for stock market returns are very, very high, and you apply that environment to a small cap environment, you can sense that it's an environment that ultimately will lead to tears. And that's exactly what happened. The manager, through no fault of her own, was forced to buy IPOs. She was forced to buy businesses at valuations that were, even to a novice like me, extraordinary. I remember in August going to her and basically saying, I just graduated. I have no experience at this, but if you apply these dividend discount models that we learned in one of the portfolio management classes in school, every stock in this portfolio is overvalued by at least 2 times. And she said, I know, but I got to invest. That's my job. Well, '87 came along, and I'll never forget the date. for someone that, starting in the industry with no direct responsibility for anybody's money, it was the best experience that anybody with a value investing bent could have had. I watched the screens and I still remember to this day, the senior managers in the firm were sitting there in disbelief as everything went no bid. And it was a real lesson to learn for me in the preservation of capital and what can happen when valuations or investments are purchased at valuations that are extreme. It can, when everything's settled down, the small cap stocks, many never ever came back. And the flip side of the valuation equation in my mind is the quality of the business that you're buying. And again, it was an invaluable lesson in understanding that if you buy poor quality businesses, you're going to suffer a permanent loss of capital, not a quotational loss, a permanent loss of capital. And I don't know if you've talked about IPOs in this class over the last week, but IPOs are always a bad bet. IPOs are something to avoid if you're a value investor, and generally at any time they are geared to maximize the price for the seller, which is never good for the buyer. Many in the small cap, many are concept type stocks. Many are just fundamentally unsound. Many are just speculations. And so, being exposed to the consequences of an environment that leads to that type of investing really just reinforced the notion that value investing is the way to go. I knew that when that happened and when I saw it happen, I knew that I never wanted to be in a position where I was responsible for losing that kind of money for people. When I started working at OMERS, I decided, I was in a career and I was going to be the best I could at it. And so I started searching out what and who the successful investors were and what they did, what philosophy they followed. And I came across Benjamin Graham, and I read his book, and I took to it like a fish out of water. I just got it, and we can talk a little about why I think I got it, but it's one of those things that Warren Buffett has said in the past. Value investing is something that you either get immediately or you never get at all. And for me, fortunately, it just seemed to resonate, and I got it. I got it intellectually. I got it at the core of my understanding of how to make money. It doesn't mean it's the only way. It doesn't mean it's necessarily the right way all the time. But for me, I understood it and I got it. And from there, I just read everything that I could on value investing. I read every book on analysis that I could, and I sought out people in the industry that were, at that time, highly regarded practitioners. People like John DiTommaso, Prem Watsa, a whole slew of them, John Neff in the United States. So, and through that process, it reinforced my belief in value investing, the belief that it actually works, the fact that it is, in my opinion, the best way to make returns with the lowest amount of risk. And that's the key to me is, everything has a trade-off, and you can have higher returns, but then there's a risk equation. And for me, everything's about risk-adjusted rates of return. And I can't see any other way to maximize your risk or minimize your risk while maximizing your profit. And that's what I think the beauty of value investing is all about, that it focuses first and foremost on risk and then on the return. And if you do that properly, over time, over a long period of time, you should get a rate of return that, on a risk-adjusted basis, is superior to other strategies and indexes. After I left OMERS, I was fortunate enough to work at Hamlin Watsa, which was the investment arm of Fairfax, and I worked with Prem, who's the benefactor of the Ivy, or the Graham, the Benjamin Graham School of Investment at Ivy. there it was a tremendous experience. It focused or it exposed me to what the power of value investing can do when it's combined with concentration. Most traditional investors, and OMERS to some degree was a traditional institutional money manager, they have a broadly diversified group of stocks or portfolios. I remember one day my boss, who was wonderful, we went to a board meeting and someone asked me, one of the board members asked me, this is at OMERS, and I was managing the small cap fund, and he asked me, one of the board members asked me, well, what if you can't find anything that meets your criteria? Because I went through the value investing. And I said, well, we just won't buy it. We won't be in that industry. My boss just jumped out of his chair. He says, oh, no, what Vito really means is we'll buy the cheapest stock in the industry. And so when I went to Hamlin Watson, we were freed from that constraint. We created portfolios of 20 to 25 stocks, heavy concentration, average down, and I saw the power of that strategy. It's incredible what it can do, especially when you combine it with very strong fundamental business analysis. And I think one of the things, one of the messages I want to leave with you tonight is that to be a good value investor, I think, to add more value than just a value index, I think you have to really understand business, and you really have to be a business analyst as opposed to a financial analyst or a stock analyst. I think Warren Buffett, if you read his readings, he will say that he's a business analyst first and an investor second. And I think, going back to a little plug for Ivy, I think that schools that focus on a generalist type of education that look at the whole strategic business or study business from that strategic angle, I think helps in making that analysis more effective. But I spent 2 years or 4 years at Hamlin Watson, and then I went to Trimark, which is a large publicly traded mutual fund company. There I learned, the appreciation. Trimark had a little bit more of a focus on quality businesses. When I got there, I was exposed to that area of investing where people focused on quality. And so at the end of the day, when I looked through my career, I was exposed to, a great fundamental training program, a great value shop, and then a shop that focused a little bit more on quality. And I was able to put those together and come up with a strategy that I think is appropriate for what we do, and I think over the long term really provides some exciting rates of return above and beyond an index, and perhaps above and beyond your traditional value strategy. What we do today, after I left Trimark, I started Patient Capital, and what the accumulation of that experience, led me to what we do today. And in effect, what we do today is I've labeled it absolute value investing, which means if you can't find anything that meets your criteria, do nothing. Wait. Invest in T-bills, invest in some kind of fixed income security, but don't focus or don't invest in securities that don't meet your criteria. And one of the issues that value investors have had over time is how do you avoid the bad business? How do you avoid the value trap? How do you avoid businesses that look statistically cheap but have no prospects for real returns or real value? Sometimes it's cheap because it's worth that statistically. And value investors over time, who have to be fully invested, have migrated to what Warren Buffett would call these cigar butts, or what are low quality businesses, because they have to be fully invested. So if you're a value investor in today's environment, or an institutional environment, you can't find any quality businesses that meet your criteria for value, whether it's a low PE, whether it's a low price to book, a high dividend. If you can't find any of those, or enough to construct a portfolio that makes it comfortable. So you migrate down the quality scale. So you will compromise, most value managers, in order to be fully invested, will compromise on quality and focus on statistically cheap companies in those environments. And it's because they don't want to be accused of style drift. They don't want to be accused of style drift. And style drift is simply, consultants, people looking at your portfolio will say, what's the trade your style? And so they invest in these, cigar butts. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. What we do, or what we focused on at Patient Capital Management is, if we can't find this business that is trading at a very, very substantial discount to its intrinsic value, which we define as about 50%, and if the business isn't a quality business, then we simply do nothing. And that's the beauty of what having my own firm does. It allows me to do that. I have no pressure on me to do anything but that. If someone doesn't like it, they don't come with us. I'm not here to grow our business. If we have a client that doesn't like what we're doing, I have a money back guarantee. If you complain, we give you your money back. So in essence, we get to choose our clients. If they don't fit, we spend more time turning away our clients than accepting clients. We want to make sure that the clients we have truly buy into what we do and are in it for the long term. We don't want to spend a lot of time convincing people that they should stay with us. We don't want to disappoint people. We don't want to have debates about our philosophy. It really has to be a buy-in right at the beginning, and I think we do a good job of that by screening out the clients and spending a lot of time with them before they come on board. So that's a summary of what got me into this business and where I am today. I will say that I've been very, very fortunate in my career. First of all, I've been fortunate, just to get the jobs that I have had, and then to have the support from many mentors and many peers in what we do. It's interesting when you do what is right, people tend to support you in one way or another. So, and I've been very, very fortunate to have that support. One of the things George asked me to talk about is, what are some of the personality traits that make me a value investor? And like I said, why was it that I was able to pick up this book and say, wow, this makes sense to me? I think the first thing is that I hate to lose money. Growing up, we were very poor. So when you're poor, you know the value of a dollar. So I just hate to lose money. And as soon as I found something that said, there's a way to make money without losing it, it just struck home with me. I think part of it is just my background, that our family didn't have a lot growing up. Because we didn't have a lot growing up, somehow I think I learned to delay gratification. So, we were always taught, go to school, get an education, and you won't be as poor. Your families won't be as economically disadvantaged as you are. My parents always drummed that into us, and I think that helped with the whole notion of long-term thinking. It drove that point home, and somehow that became part of my personality, my value system, is to focus on the long term and delay short-term gains for true long-term rewards. For some reason, I have a contrarian streak in me. I'm not really influenced by what others think. Some would say that I'm somewhat irreverent. I have, when I started this business, I didn't understand why the investors who own the shares would kowtow to the executives of the company. I didn't understand it. I would sort of talk to them in these meetings initially, and here you have institutions that essentially own the company, and you have owners that own 9–10% of the business, and they're showing deference to the CEO of the company and the board. And I never understood that. We're the owners. They're working for us. Why on earth would we not question them? Why wouldn't you demand a level of respect that an owner should have? It doesn't mean that you're disrespectful. It just means that you recognize that you're the owner and that the managers and the board of directors of that firm is accountable to the owners. And I had that attitude right from the start. I don't know why, but I always had it. I think that helped me understand and accept that, you know, if you buy a cheap stock and you hold the management accountable, over time, that strategy should work. I think that irreverence allowed me to ask questions that, what to me, were perfectly legitimate questions like, you know, 2 years ago you bought this company and, you know, you overpaid for it and now you're written it all off. Why did you do that, and how can I trust you not to do it again? I was never afraid to ask those questions, even when I started the business. And again, I don't know why, but I did. And I could never understand why no one would ask those questions. They would, you know, treat the manager with gentle gloves. I think you've seen some of that change with these activist investors, but you know, I would say that for the most part, that deference attitude towards management, I think, largely exists among several, you know, institutional investors. I tend to think in probabilities. Maybe one of the reasons we were poor, my dad gambled, and when I was 6 or 7 years old, he'd take me to his poker games. And so maybe inherent in there, I learned something about not losing money and thinking in probabilities. I'm fairly logical, and I think I can spot intellectual inconsistencies in whether it's you know, someone having a discussion, whether it's in numbers, whether it's in a business strategy, and because of that, I think I can detect problems pretty quickly. I think, you know, one of the things that to be successful in anything you do, I think you have to love what you do. And I love analyzing businesses, right from when I was a kid. I was reading Business Week and Fortune and all the business magazines of the day when I was at 16 years old, believe it or not. I go down to the local library and start reading the magazines. And then to this day, I still subscribe to all those magazines and read them ferociously. I have a very strong faith in the process. Again, it goes back to this notion of accepting and understanding what value investing is all about. And I have a very strong faith that if you do your work and do it properly, and spend a lot of time at it, that it will work out on a portfolio basis over a long period of time. I can honestly say that because of that faith in that process and doing it over and over and over again, I've never lost any sleep over any investment that I've ever made. I know that occasionally we're going to make a mistake, but I don't lose any sleep over that. That is part of the investing process, and making a mistake occasionally, it comes with the territory, and that's why equities earn a rate of return higher than bonds. That you are going to make a mistake once in a while, that there is some risk. What I try to do is eliminate that risk as much as possible. But once we do the work and do the work according to our criteria, and we make the decision, then there is no looking back for us. We make a mistake, we learn from it, and we go back and understand why we made the mistake. But we do have absolute faith in the process, and you know, that allows us to be very, very decisive. Once we make that decision, or once we do the work, it's very, very clear to us that it's either a buy or no buy, and when you buy, you go ahead and buy it. And if the stock continues to go down, we buy more because we've done the work. And that's the fundamental, one of the fundamental understandings that one should have about value investing, is that when a stock goes down, if you've done the work and you're convinced that your work is right, and you have that long-term focus, it doesn't make any sense not to buy more as it goes down. So if you think something's worth 10, and you're convinced that it's worth 10, and you buy it at 6, you should buy more at 5, and you should buy more at 4, and you should buy more at 3. It doesn't make any sense to do anything else, of course, in the context of portfolio constraints. But that's the attitude one should have. And it goes back to the notion of, you know, you're buying a business. You're not buying a piece of paper. You're not buying a lottery ticket. You're buying a business. And the intrinsic value of a business does not change much, or very much on a minute, it doesn't change at all actually, on a minute-to-minute basis, or on a month-to-month basis, or even on an annual basis. intrinsic value, unless there's something dramatic that happens, for most business, just grows at a steady compound rate of return. So, if you buy something worth 10 at 5 and it goes to 3, if you're a true value investor, you should buy more. And you will buy more if you're true to the discipline and you actually have the temperament to do it. So that's I think some of the characteristics that I think make me a value investor and allow me to do it and do it consistently and without fear. One of the things that I think is important to note is, that organizations aren't set up to support value investing. There's an institutional bias against value investing, not the philosophy, but the behavior of actually implementing a value investing strategy. And it's because most investment management businesses are in business to gather assets. And so a value investment strategy can be out of favor and can be scary to clients at any particular point in time. And so managers who follow that strategy tend to be under pressure to conform to a more index-like or a herd-like or an industry-like type of return. This industry does pay very well, and it has a lot of perks, and people in the industry don't want to lose their jobs. Like no one else, like anybody else, or in the other profession, but this one in particular has a lot of rewards, both financial and psychic, that make people really not want to lose their job. And so they're forced into, this index type of investing, this, as long as I'm not too different from anybody else, I won't get fired. Although many clients say that they're value investors and at the beginning of the process, give you the money and agree to the strategy. Once it starts to happen, once you start buying things that are way out of favor, once you start buying stocks on the way down, they get scared. They get scared either because a consultant tells them that, hey, you know what, this performance is underperforming, or that, or temperamentally they can't handle it themselves. But they get scared and they pull their money. So that makes value investing very difficult to implement on a traditional firm-wide type of basis. In essence, many clients aren't appropriate for value investing, and they're the wrong clients for a value investing manager. And because firms don't want to lose managers or don't want to lose clients, again, the manager is forced to compromise on the value investing strategy. There's a lot of focus, of course, on quarterly performance and annual performance. And again, a value investing strategy doesn't necessarily conform to that cycle. When we look at the performance of our investments over time, in the first year of our investment, we have typically a 5-year horizon. So in the first year of our investment, the stock will go down, sometimes quite dramatically. In the second year of our investment, the stock will go down a little bit or bottom out. In the third year of our investment, it'll get back to our break-even price. It'll get back to our cost. In the fourth year, we make some money. And then in the fifth year is where we get all the return. That's the typical investment profile of a value stock.
Why don't you wait for years?
Because, that's a great question, and we get that all the time. Why don't you just wait? Because you just don't know when that catalyst might come along, or what the market will do. And because we have a rate of return in year one, when we buy the stock, our objective is a 20% compound annual rate of return over 5 years. So as Warren Buffett says, we'd rather have a lumpy 20% compound annual rate of return than a very smooth 5 or 6% compound annual rate of return. And so if you take that strategy away, you're going to miss a lot of opportunities. And you're not really true to the style, you're in effect market timing. And then finally, I think the other big impediment that a lot of people don't talk about is It's just, many firms have large teams. And I think part of the reason they have large teams is either the portfolio manager is not strong enough in his convictions, or more importantly, clients feel better when they have a strong team around, or when an organization has a large team. And we experienced that at Jeff. There's only 2 of us doing investing at our firm. And clients and institutional investors will say, well, XYZ firm has 20 analysts, how can you compete against them? Or are you missing opportunities? Or whatever the response is, or whatever the objection is. But I believe strongly that large teams are an impediment to an investment process, as opposed to a help. I have a saying that the intellectual integrity of the investment process is inversely proportional to the number of people involved. And if you think about it, if you've got a large team, the manager's got to keep everybody happy. In essence, becomes investment by committee. It leads to compromise. It leads to politics within the group. It leads to all those behavioral and interpersonal and people management issues that I strongly believe and have seen lead to a compromise in the investment philosophy. I think that the smaller the team, the better, obviously. I think that if you look at the results of small teams, they tend to generally outperform the results of larger teams. And if you look at, Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett's career, if you look at, and I've really thought about what's made him successful. Obviously, he's passionate. He's extremely intelligent. But I think at the very, very beginning, he figured this out. If you read one of his stories, he basically gave his sister a tip on buying a preferred share, I believe. And his sister would ask him every day, why is my stock down? When is it going up? And he got sick of it. He said, that's it, I'm never going to invest, I'm never going to have another partner again working alongside me. In the early 70s, he actually had someone working with him, and that didn't work out. So if you look at the world's most successful investor, there's essentially him and Charlie Munger. He has no investment committee. He has no investment team. He basically makes decisions for the long term with him and the partner, and that's it. There are no clients. It's all his money or the firm's money. There is no requirement for quarterly performance. There is no requirement to meet clients and talk to them. If he doesn't find what he wants, he doesn't do it. There is no pressure on him from outside sources. Like he says, there's not a whole audience out there saying, or a whole crowd out there saying, swing you bum at every pitch that comes his way. So I think structure is extremely important. The structure of an organization is extremely important in allowing that value investment philosophy to be properly and truly implemented. So one of the other topics that George asked me to talk about was how we find stocks and how we find investment opportunities. Really, our most common way, and I would say over 95% of the investments that we make come from are just simple screens. The databases are extensive today, as you know, so we have very simple process. We're looking for low PEs, low price to books, high dividend yields, and low debt. That's our initial screen. And I've done this, from the very start. It's not more complicated than that. And then we start just plowing through what the screens pop up. We sometimes get ideas by just talking to others and listening to others. And then we read a lot. Some ideas just come from reading. Another source of ideas is if we're analyzing company A and then we fall into looking at company B because they're a competitor or a supplier to the industry. That's another source. But at the end of the day, most of our our ideas come from screening. It's efficient, it's effective, and it narrows the universe to a manageable amount. One of the most important parts of value investing, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail because you can go to the website and look at that presentation, which I do get into some detail, is really the analysis of a business. And I think, what some value investors have said get caught is in value traps, and even worse, sometimes you get caught in fraud. And I think those with a fundamental understanding of accounting, and that's critical. I think you can't do this job properly without accounting. Accounting is the language of business, and if there's any, thank you very much. And if there's any prospective value investors or people who want to get into value investing or are value investing and want to really nail it, I think you have to understand accounting and understand it as almost as good as if you were an accountant yourself. It's critical. And then you actually, and I'm going to say this, you may not believe this, but you actually have to read the annual reports. You have to read the notes. There's a lot of investors, and I will include value investors in that, either take a superficial look at the statements, or worse, they download the statements from a database into their Excel model. And the Excel model spits out all these ratios, and then the DCF, and all of it. And to me, that's black box investing. You have to understand the business. If you're going to do this right, you have to understand the business. And there's only one way, in my opinion, to understand the business. And that's to read the annual reports and read the notes. And then you have to read it again. Eric Sprott, who was a great fundamental analyst, once told me that he would read an annual report 10 times. What we do at Patient Capital is we read 10 years of annual reports. So every investment we make, we go back and we read 10 years of annual reports. That's from cover to cover. And then what we do is when we build our models, and this is insistent. If you work for me, or if you work at Patient Capital, you have to input, and I do this myself because I always do it, even if I have someone work with me. You have to input each number into the model, number by number by number, year by year by year. You have to do that. And when you do that, you come to understand the business. You can't help it. Just by osmosis, you have to understand even just a little bit. You don't even think about it. You'll understand a little bit of how this business operates. If you actually think about it and work through it, you will get a very deep understanding of the business just by simply going through that process.
Thank you very much for saying this, because I tell my students exactly this. I say, oh, send me the file. I said, no, you got to input this number. So.
Exactly. And I can't stress that enough. And it goes to really that whole issue of understanding the business and accepting that you are buying a business, you're not buying a piece of paper. And if you were to make your own an investment, whether it was a car, a house, a small business, how many of you would actually go through a process where you downloaded information without looking, without understanding what you were buying? No one in this room. No one. Yet people do that with other people's money on an institutional basis. So that to me is critical, is to understand what you're doing, to understand accounting, and then in that process, look for risks. Look for risks in the business. One of the things I always read with great detail is there in these 10 cases I'm sure you've all seen, the risk factors. And most of them are standard risk factors, right? I mean, they're just boilerplate that everybody has. But occasionally, something will jump out at you, something big. And when you see that, you better investigate it and understand it, and determine whether you're willing to take that risk or not.
Can you give an example?
There'll be an example of, say, some obscure statement like, we have guaranteed a loan to a supplier for their business, for example. And they don't tell you what the loan is, or the amount, but there's this, and they say, and, you know, this may impact our business if we have to come clean, if we have to support it. And you dig further, you dig deeper, and then you go into the notes, and you find that this loan that they've guaranteed is half of their equity, or it's some huge amount that could put them at risk. Sometimes there's litigation that pops out at you. There's one that we had that one of your classes, I think, there was one investment that was highly recommended and scored very highly with everybody else. And George, and I gave it a 0, and everybody else I think gave it a very high score. And George emailed me and said, you know, are you sure this is what you want to give it? And it had to do with a lawsuit. And this lawsuit, in my opinion, could have put the company out of business, particularly in the United States. And it may be right or it may be wrong, but the point is that it's a risk that I identified and that I wasn't willing to take. So there's all these, you know, there's all sorts. There's too many to name over the years. But at the end of the day, you will see it, and it'll stand out at you that it's an anomaly. It's not your standard boilerplate risk factor, but it's there. And then, you know, the most important part of the annual report, I think, is the notes. The notes tell a far different story than typically what the management says. There's annual reports that are few and far between that tell it like it is. Most are a PR exercise written by PR people. So you have to go to the notes. I think that's all I'll spend time on, the analysis of a business. Yes, sir.
Vito, can you speak, so you mentioned a few things that you do in terms of reading, obviously, annual reports, but can you kind of walk us through your typical day? So you get up in the morning, how do you kind of spend your day? Obviously, reading's pretty broad, but how much time are you spending in annual reports versus business versus what other value investors are doing, books that might be related to the industries? I'm looking for a little bit of detail there.
So my typical day would be my typical day actually starts at the night before. So before I go to sleep, I don't know why I do this, but I will look at the futures. Just to sort of, you know, what kind of day might it be tomorrow? Just psychologically, so, you know, if it's going down, you know, can we buy something tomorrow? But I just do that. I get up and I fight the traffic and I go to work, get there about 8. And for the first hour, I will read the papers. I will read the Globe, I will read the Post, I will read the Wall Street Journal from 8 to 9. And then I update our portfolios because we have some pools that have money coming in and out. So I want to make sure that every day I know exactly what the positions are and the weightings. So I do that. That takes about 15-20 minutes. Then I just then I will spend 80% of that extra, that other time reading annual reports and modeling. We will talk to clients, see prospective clients. 80% of the time, though, is spent on investment process and analysis. And again, that's modeling, that's reading annual reports, or having a discussion with the person who works with me about either an investment we're looking at or an investment we own. If you come to our offices, you will find that it's like a library, I think. It's pretty boring in there. George, you've been there. So Marcus, you've been there. So it's boring. There's not a lot of activity going on. We don't even have a professional trader. We just speak or just spend our time reading. It's literally a library. A young person came to me about 2 or 3 months ago, and they wanted to find out what investing was all about, or what the typical investor day would be like. And I said, this is it. It's a library, and if not, it's probably even less quieter in the library because there's not that many people here. think that totally discouraged him from pursuing a career in investing. So, you know, we'll read industry reports, we will read, I will read, you know, I'm an avid reader. You know, if I say I read 100 books on investing, I would say that's probably an underestimation. So you know, we read a lot. I read a lot of trade magazines, a lot of business magazines, and that's the typical day. You know, we're lucky our clients don't. You know, again, we choose our clients, so we don't spend a lot of time with our clients answering questions for our clients. So that really is a typical day. By the way, we do not use sell side analyst reports. That is unacceptable in our firm. Some use it, some firms use it, a lot of firms use it, obviously there's a demand for it, we don't. My view is if you have to rely on those guys, you shouldn't be in this business, quite frankly. I mean, that sounds arrogant, but it's our process and I strongly believe it. And the people who sell those or use produce those reports, their time frames and their motivations are very, very different. So I just don't understand why you would rely on someone else's information, particularly if you're doing what we say we do. Yes.
Do you not think there could be qualitative information in the reports that would be interesting?
If you've done your homework, the marginal benefit of reading those reports is very, very small. And the negative is, and I've seen this all the time, everybody says, you know what? I only read this sell-side report, I only read it for the information. I never look at the valuations. I don't care about their recommendations. Baloney. Hey, I don't care who you are. We're all humans. If you've got 10 reports all saying, oh, this is a sell, it's going to impact you some way or another. And again, the marginal benefit of what we do, or I'm reading those reports, relative to what we do, I would say the benefit is negative. I want to make sure you guys, sorry, you're going to.
How do you go about screening your clients? That to me seems like the biggest risk.
It's pretty easy, actually. We tell them that this is the returns they should expect, and the returns we tell them that they should expect are very, very are low. So we like to underperform, under promise and over deliver. We show them you know, our annual returns and our quarterly returns, and we tell them that you know these returns are going to be lumpy, and we show them that in some years where the market's been up 20%, we've been up 4 or 5. And we tell them that we're not going to change. We ask for, you know, if they're willing, we ask, you know, do you have other money managers? Can you tell us, can we talk to them? We do all that. We do a very, very good job of rejecting more clients than we accept. And I think that it's for that very reason. You know, we don't want to disappoint people. We don't want to have the wrong people come to our firm because it's a distraction and a disappointment for everybody. But it's really, it's a self-selection process as well. And what we find, even with institutional clients, when we do things, you either click almost immediately on a personal level and on a values level, and they get the philosophy just, you know, maybe not as deep, but they understand at some level of what we're trying to do, and they either get it very quickly or they don't. We don't mince any words. We're not here, we don't sugarcoat, we're not here to sell people. We just tell them the truth. Yes.
So I'm interested in the difference between OMERS and Trimark because taking into consideration the herd mentality and they both have interests and incentive plans and Trimark, you said they're public. Why was Trimark better at understanding value and not letting that herd mentality?
No, I didn't say that.
Sorry, I thought that's what you said.
No, I said
Trimark was better.
no, Trimark, I said I learned an appreciation for quality businesses.
Okay.
OMERS, in fact, was a better environment than a publicly traded company would be. OMERS was truly a long-term investor without any pressure for, you know, gathering assets or stock price performance or anything like that. It had other pressures, but from a value, from a process point of view, from an alignment of interest with the investor, the management, the portfolio managers, and the people whose money they were managing, those interests were far more aligned than, say, a publicly traded mutual fund company. For a publicly traded mutual fund company, the objective, and Trimark, you know, tried to make these balances as well as anybody could, but they still fell to the pressures of it. It's understandable. the objective of a publicly traded company is to grow profits and to grow your revenues. And if if you're publicly traded, you want the share price to go up. So you have all these pressures on you that make staying to one strategy that may be out of favor for some time difficult. So it's actually the reverse of what you may have picked up. Yes, sir.
Sorry, losing the voice. What other things do you look at besides quarterly reports and annual reports when you're analyzing a company in depth? Like down on conference calls, do you pay a lot of attention to those? Do you spend a lot of time going back and looking for news articles and trying to figure out what the general consensus belief is? Kind of walk me through that process.
That's a great question. I would say that 80% of the information that's most important to us comes from quarterly and annual reports over 10 years. Then we would say that industry, trade, financial reporting type would be the other would be about remaining 15% of that, and then 5% I would say miscellaneous. We listen to conference calls only because as a fiduciary, if something were to be missed, it wouldn't be appropriate. The value, in my opinion, of quarterly conference calls is almost zero. If you listen to the calls, there's no real information that's provided, and you get a whole bunch of analysts who are asking for the next quarter's results. They're asking for, well, I'm trying to model, the earnings for the next quarter, and I'm getting 51, but your numbers are suggesting it's 49 cents. Ridiculous. There's no value if you're a true long-term value investor in that process. There's no value at all. As a matter of fact, other than the fiduciary duty that you have to, I think, because they're there. And by the way, we don't listen to them, I read them. I think the marginal benefit, again, is negative. And, I'm talking about marginal benefit. I think there's two really in this business, there's two resources that everybody has on an equal basis. One is time, and the other is information. Those are the two resources that all investors have equally. And to me, it's a matter of how you use both of those resources. Time, of course, is non-renewable, so you have to decide how you're going to use your time relative to everybody else who's competing against you. And then, of course, the information is you have to decide what information and how you're going to process it and analyze it. And I think the use of those two resources and how you use those two resources is the defining difference in performance over a long period of time. So if you look, say again, going back to someone like Warren Buffett, I mean, from what I've read, and I'm sure when you talk to him, he spends most of his time reading. That's what he did. And reading financial information. Now, naturally, some people are going to be better at processing information than others. But all things being equal, if you're using your time properly to focus on the things that are truly important in the investment process and the investment decision, and processing that information properly, you're going to do a lot better than someone who's wasting their time, or using their time on things that aren't really important. One of the things that I learned early on was to really focus on the aspects of a business that are critical to the business success. And when I was at Western, we called it key success factors. And so, in my opinion, and this is what I try to always get people who work with me to understand is that, again, you've only got so much time. So, are you going to spend your time understanding what drives 95% of this business? Or are you going to spend 95% of your time understanding what drives 5% of the business? You want to understand what drives the business. That's what you want to understand. And you want to spend the vast majority of your time understanding what drives, on the biggest driver or drivers of that business. I remember one time going to a conference, this was early on in my career. It was some company, I think that made training simulators for pilots. And there were these investors who were actually excited about learning about the simulator, like learning the technical aspects of the simulator, which is wonderful industry and interesting. But I thought to myself, I don't really understand how that's going to help them value this company. It's great that you see it and you kind of have a feel for it, but to spend hours learning about the mechanics and details of an aircraft simulator, relative to reading the annual reports and understanding the dynamics of the business, the competitive environment, I don't think that's a good use of time. That's me personally, but I think it's the critical point here is that you want to spend and focus your time on the areas of the business that are most critical. And how do you do that? You know, one of the things, you know, that you can take away from this is what I've learned over the years is if you look at a balance sheet, if you look at a company's balance sheet, and you look down and you say, okay, what are the biggest items on this balance sheet? So if it's a distribution business, typically the biggest items are accounts receivable, inventories, obviously, and payables. And that's what you should focus your efforts on, understanding those components of the business. How they're managed, what risks they have, how other competitors position themselves on those same metrics. But that's the key. If you're investing in an asset-intensive business, for example, steel mill, the biggest asset on the balance sheet is property, plant, and equipment, obviously. So you want to understand that part of the business. You want to understand the returns on the fixed assets that they have. You want to understand the cost structure of that part of the business. You want to focus your efforts in understanding the biggest component of the driver of the business. And the biggest clue to that driver for most businesses really is what's sitting on the balance sheet.
So this kind of picks up on the name of your fund, which you've dubbed it the patient investor. So from when you start your screening process and you get something that is a new stock that you haven't been watching, but it gets your attention for some reason, and you study it further, and as you study it, it starts to show signs of spark your interest, and you keep going further. Typical stock that sort of does that, how long would it take you from when you first start looking at it to the point at which you're ready to make a decision that you want to buy? Like, is it a week? Is it a month? Is it 3 months? Or is it?
I think it's a moving target, depending on the business and the complexity of the business. But I'd say on average, it's probably, if you look, you've got me and my associate working together on it, probably on average 80 hours. And that's from start to finish. So about 2 weeks.
Yeah, and that could happen just in a 2-week period, essentially.
Yes?
I have a question about like developing as an investor. You look at a company, you analyze it, and then you decide, let's say, to make the plunge and buy it. But you don't get the results of, whether you're right or wrong for many years. And then even then, there's a question of chance. You could actually have the analysis right, but because of bad luck, you might actually have a bad outcome, but the analysis was right. So how do you actually look at that and actually, develop as an investor, even though you might not get that feedback for many years, and the chance still at play as well?
Well, I think that, to answer the second point first, is that you have to accept, as I said earlier, chance. You have to accept some element of risk. That if you've done your work and, God forbid, there's some disaster, you can't control it. It's going to happen. Or you made a mistake. It's going to happen once in a while. Assuming you're good at what you do and you do the process. So you have to accept it. That's just part of investing. We like to say that we have that big red bat with the big fat head and the big balloon beach ball that we want to swing at. So it's almost that even someone that's uncoordinated as I can actually hit it So that's what we're looking for. But even having said that, we are gonna make a mistake once in a while. So you have to accept that. With regards to your second point, I think, you know, I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, there are some, you know, some ways of training yourself to accept delayed results. But at the end of the day, I think, you know, if it's not there at the start, I think it's going to be very difficult to implement a strategy that requires a long time frame to earn those results. There's, you know, there's been several studies that show that from a very early age, there are some kids who will be able to resist a temptation, and others can't, given a set of far-off rewards. So I think it's part of it is really who you are, and it may be difficult to change that.
We're getting close to the end. We're going to have a reception, and Vito will be there. If you want to talk to him more. Let's ask one more question, okay? So, oh yeah, a question.
Could you please give us a sense of your view on relying on management as a source of information? And secondly, the importance of using shareholder activism as a driver of value unlock?
I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to address that. You know, people always say, well, we want to assess the quality of management, and my view is to try to be as objective as possible in what we do. And the real evidence of a management's ability or talent is in the numbers. The numbers don't lie if you've done them properly. If you've analyzed them properly, numbers don't lie. So that, you know, if you're comparing one firm in an industry relative to another firm in the industry, and one firm has consistently better results than the other firm, you know, it's pretty clear to me that the evidence would suggest that one is better than the other. We try not to make that subjective analysis, or that is a subjective decision. What we do though is when we spend time with management, we will only go see a management when we're truly prepared. I think it's a waste of time to go and see a management if you're not prepared. As I said before, we spend, you know, at least 80 hours collectively analyzing a company, and oftentimes more. Before we go see a management, we are prepared, literally. We will not go see them unless we're prepared. And you know, when we talk to them, we don't really talk about, you know, financials. If we have to talk to them about the financials, a clarification question, you know, again, accounting, the numbers are there for you to see. What we talk about really is corporate strategy, organizational structure, marketing strategy, risks, controls, how people are evaluated, how people are rewarded, all those sort of, you know, issues that a generalist would look at. We talk about HR policies, all of that. The financial numbers, again, I say they're the last thing we talk about if at all. We never ever ask about quarterly results. We never even ask about annual results. We really go there and try to understand the company and the business and the risks that company faces and how they're responding to those risks. And then we test, and you know, again, one of the things I mentioned earlier that I think I'm able to do is just, you know, quickly see intellectual inconsistencies, and then if we see that, we challenge them on that, and if we don't get a satisfactory answer to that intellectual inconsistency, you know, then we would probably stay away from the investment. You know, what someone once said to me, if you have to get involved in shareholder activism, you probably made a mistake. It doesn't mean there's a place for it. It doesn't mean that I haven't done it in the past behind closed doors. But the ideal investment is where you've invested in a high-quality business with a good management team, where the problem is temporary, you've done the correct analysis, and the business turns around as expected. If you know, you get really involved in that, as doing what we do, then I think you made a mistake. That doesn't mean there's not a place for activism. If a company is underperforming and the strategy of a firm is active investing to go fix that company, that's a great strategy. But given what we do, I think if we end up in an activist position, we made a mistake.
Vito, what's the most important thing you learned in investing in your career?
What's the most important?
In investing.
I would say that, I think would be to be patient, really, once you've done all the work, once you've understood your the valuation. I think the most important thing is just let the strategy play out. Don't panic when things go against you. And then the corollary to that, or the foundation to that, would be that do the work. Once you've done the work, once you go through a very, very in-depth process, and you're convinced that the facts are right, stick with the strategy. On a portfolio basis, if you do it, and do it well, and stick to a value-based approach, key is stick to it, and have patience with it. Over time, it will work.